Welcome to the Genius Awards Podcast 2021, where we're going to go over every single category and every single nomination, give our own takes, while taking a trip down memory lane and celebrating the wonderful past year. I'm your host, MarcerMercer, and I'm joined today by two of my friends, Grunkle Squeaky and XNimus, to discuss the Genius Awards. Say hello.
Hello, I'm XNimus. I'm the unprofessional one.
My name's Grunkle Squeaky. I'm the better unprofessional one.
Welcome, guys. Welcome. So, how did you find this past year for the Genius community?
Well, the past year has been my only one, so I have to make sure that I'm saying everything comes with a bit of a pinch of salt. But I think that, at least from what I've seen and from what I've backread, this has been a very eventful year for the Genius, not only because of what has completed, but what is still ongoing. But for what has completed, I think that things like just all the orgs that have completed this year have provided a lot of influence for any org that will be happening in the future, which I think is an absolutely wonderful accomplishment for every single org involved.
You know, I do. You bring up a good point because, like, initially my first thoughts were like, there are some orgs I wish were completed by now, but there are still a lot of orgs that are done, and we do have a good amount of material to work with.
Yeah, that's true. I know some people were a little disappointed that there's only 6 mainline Genius orgs, traditional Genius orgs that are able to be nominated for, but I think we got a pretty good batch of 6. And that just means I'm really excited for how the awards are going to look next year because there's going to be so many orgs up for nominations. So there's a silver lining to anything. All right. Well, without further ado, let's talk about these Genius Awards. Are you guys ready?
No.
As I'll ever be.
All right. Well, so for any of you watching as we go along, we're simply going to go down the award lists in the form, going from the top to the bottom. We're going to talk through each category, all the nominations, and give our thoughts on it. So the first one on this list is the categories, and the first one of those is the best to make use of its theme and its mechanics. Now this one has quite a few nominations from a diverse set of different orgs. So let's go down the list. So first up is Social Snake, which was played in Genius Game 4, but also Andy's Genius Done Quick, main match 1 in GG4, and main match 2.5 in AGDQ after a cancellation. The basic premise of the game is that you navigate your snake across multiple grids to earn as many apples as you can while avoiding other snakes. Next up is Grid Adaptation, which was main match 6 in Genius Game 4. You place cells of your kind on the field, and using Conway's Game of Life, you try to expand and be the most dominant cell. Next up is Decryption Duet from Codebreakers, which was the final main match 12 of that org. Players basically attempted to navigate the game about bluffing their identities and abilities, but what identities and abilities you got depended on your partner's math performance. Next up is Traffic Tango from Andy's Genius Done Quick, which was main match 5, in which you had to try to control the traffic in such a way that you can get to where you want, but none of your enemies really can. Next up is another Andy's Genius Done Quick game, main match 4, Dragoneering Defenders. This one's pretty simple. You fight dragons, you try to stay alive, and you try to earn the most glory by fighting the most dragons. Then we have Mini Survivor from Genius Game 4, main match 2, in which you controlled a certain amount of players in a miniature version of the popular reality TV show Survivor, and you try to survive until the very end. Next is 7 Gem Swap from Genius Game 4, which was main match 7. Had to try to swap gems around and earn points by making big regions. It was basically Candy Crush, except the candies don't disappear after you match them. And finally, Magician's Market from Andy's Genius Done Quick, the first main match of that org, where you attempt to sell and trade magician's goods in an evolving economy to try to make the most money. All right, those are all your nominations. What are your thoughts, folks?
God, man, I hope you have a lot of water stored
I do. Don't worry.
Voice is screwed.
Man, all right. So, I'm not gonna lie. I don't know much about a lot of these main matches.
Really?
Yeah, that's it.
Do you have a preference?
No. I know Social Snake, and I really love that game, and I've heard many good things about Magician's Market. And I, as the filthy casual that I am, like tend to lean towards what little I know, and so like I'm looking at those two. But in terms of theming, I feel like Social Snake, you can easily I can see it easily just being like, ooh, this could just be you fill up spaces on a grid, and then they decided later on snakes and apples. Whereas like I feel like Magician's Market, the theme was made first, and the mechanics were built around the theme. From what I heard, anyway.
I can agree with that, yeah. Like, with Social Snake, especially for this category, don't get me wrong, I love Social Snake. It's the reason why I forcefully shunted it into AGDQ. But it really kind of just, like, feels like the mechanic is the theme. It doesn't speak at all to its quality, which is ridiculously high, but it just isn't really what I would look for in this category when it comes to a themed main match, if that makes any kind of sense.
Yeah.
Magician's Market, especially, is something that I wanted to bring up because I feel like Magician's Market was able to really almost kind of like put players in the world of being in a market with magicians that are buying, with the way that there were rules for price fluctuations. Got my words mixed around there. And how the magicians would purchase from the players depending on what their inventories were. Everything in AGDQ was very much a top-down design of flavor first, mechanics later sort of ordeal, and I feel like with Magician's Market, it's very easy to see the influence that had on its design.
Yeah, I think Magician's Market was a very, very strong design that took particular inspiration from its theming, and so it's definitely one of the ones I'm voting for this one. But just to give some others some considerations other than Social Snake and Magician's Market, I also really enjoyed some of the other Andy's Genius Done Quick games, mostly Traffic Tango, because I thought that game was very interesting, and the traffic theme is vital to its mechanics, right? You're trying to prevent other people from being able to successfully navigate traffic, and it was pretty fun and well done.
Yeah, I think that it was very flawless how the mechanics were able to translate into the road signs. Everything felt intuitive. All the mechanics worked the way that they were supposed to, and it provided for really interesting gameplay. It was effectively like 4-person corridor with extra rules for anybody who knows that classic board game.
Right, so correct me if I'm wrong, Grunkle, but you had to place different types of traffic signs and blockages to try to control the traffic, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. The big catch is that you wanted to make sure you had the most straightforward path to your own destination as possible, making you use the least amount of gas, while making sure that your opponents physically can still get to their destinations, and that you don't collide with anyone on the way, which was also another major part of the entire match.
Before we move on or try to get to some of the other categories, I do want to give a shout out to Decryption Duet. I know that it is technically a reskin of a game that we all know and love called Coup. If you don't know what that is, you should search it up. Very fun game. But I thought the way the theming was done in terms of the entire kind of hacker aesthetic was really cool. And the graphics definitely helped.
Yeah, with Codebreakers revolving a lot of its just general theming around the technological hacker-esque thing, it was really nice to see the skin that they put on it. I also think that just saying it's a reskin of Coup does take a little bit of credit away from it. I think the whole partner twist with partners off doing their own puzzles to dictate how the rest of the game goes is a very welcome change. That kudos to Codebreaker's crew for figuring out to put 2 and 2 together to make 4. It was an absolutely incredible spectating experience and player experience, and the match just works well with its theme.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of fun to spectate. Seemed like a lot of fun to play. I guess some people might just be a little worried that it doesn't really seem like the mechanics come from the theme in this one, because really the mechanics kind of pre-existed.
Yeah.
But I don't think that takes away from it.
No.
All right, any closing thoughts on this category?
Put Social Snake in your next Genius Org today.
All right, so the next category on this list is the best team main match. So there needed to be teams involved. We got 5 nominations for this, a little less, but some strong contenders here. First up is Poker Puzzlers main match 3 of Andy's Genius Done Quick. Players had to try to solve puzzles, be the fastest one to solve them, to win cards that would help them assemble the perfect poker can. Next up is 3 Nations from Codebreakers. This was main match 3 of that org. And in this one, 2 different teams, Team Order and Team Chaos, tried to fight to win majority control of 3 different nations over a multitude of rounds. Codebreakers had another team game, Midas's Gambit. That was main match 11, where you had to work with your team to try to score points without being too greedy. And the rules were constantly glitching out and changing as the main match progressed, adding another layer of deceit and excitement. Next up is A Murder of Crows from Exordium. The first time we're hearing this org, it was main match 2 in Exordium, where you had 2 teams, Cats and the Crows. Cats try to survive, Crows try to hunt the cats in this mafia-like game. And finally, Kong's Dilemma 2 from the Genius Codebreakers. This was main match 6, which was, if you're familiar with Kong's Dilemma, it was just that, but with 3 different teams. The classic dilemma. You need to spend to win, but if you spend too much, you're bound to lose. All right. Any thoughts on what you think is the best team main match, Grunkle?
I know which one's my least favorite.
Oh no, poor Grunkle.
What? Which one would you consider your least favorite, Grunkle?
Listen, it's unfair to Kong's Dilemma 2 to call it my least favorite when there are just some memories revolving around that episode that I will truly cherish forever. If it does come to which one I had to pick as my personal absolute favorite, it's tough to put aside like my bias from winning it, but I think Midas's Gambit was a very well designed match with just. I think a part of it was just the live experience and the way that the match was so actively changing and taking great advantage of the live format, with the main match rules changing after every single 15-minute round period, and having to completely readjust your strategy and readjust who you were talking to, and what your plans were for the rest of the game. And just it generally being a push your luck game leads to a lot of room for social play and a lot of room for good strategy. I think it is one of the best main matches I've seen in total, much less best team main match. But I think Midas's Gambit's absolutely a strong contender for the winner for this category.
It was basically like if you tried to get the most money, you wouldn't end up getting any money at all, and you tried to have to be like second best or slightly lower, right?
Mm-hmm. It was a lot about defining your own personal boundaries, about how much you're willing to take in order to make sure that you don't get zeroed out for being the greediest.
X, do you have any thoughts on the best team main match? I know you were hosting one of these games.
Oh my god. Well, first off, I will say I do think it is very hard to get a team main match right, considering you are making a team game. It's sort of like artificial team within a game where you make your own alliances and people may prioritize the meta game over the actual current game you're playing, and that may lead to things like throwing or like people not playing to their win conditions. But I do think like I just based on what I've heard, Midas's Gambit, it looked really fun. The whole glitched aspect of it also made it a lot more interesting to spectate, and the fact that it was Final Four as well made a more individual experience. Murder of Crows, that is what we hosted, isn't it?
That is
what you hosted.
Yes, I think the idea of it, if I remember correctly, was like you are one of 2 roles. One of the roles constantly loses HP every round.
Yep.
And they have to majority vote someone from the other role to gain HP. If I think I got that right.
Yeah, so basically the crows were losing HP constantly, and they had to basically kill the cats or feed on them so that they
Yes.
could keep their HP up, while the cats try to, in classic mafia style, vote out the crows, figure out who they are, and prevent them from doing anything in a round-to-round basis.
Yes, and I believe only one of the roles had the ability to actually vote. Was it?
Yeah, I think only the cats were allowed to vote, although the crows could pretend to vote.
Yes.
It just wouldn't go through.
I thought it was design wise. I think on paper I like it. I think I'm very biased because during the actual game, I don't know. Like it played out like pretty. Fuck, we're gonna have to cut a lot of shit out.
No, this is all making
What do
me
you mean?
edit, I
I cut a
promise.
lot of shit out. I'm keeping all of this in, dude.
Man, oh no, I feel like I don't remember much noteworthy things happening. I think it was just like solid, sort of, not broken from what I've seen. And that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, I mean, it played out very one-sidedly because one team was a lot less coordinated.
Yeah.
And I think this does bring up a very interesting question for these kind of design-based awards.
Do you factor
Would you
in
guys say that?
how it played out?
Yeah, would you guys factor in how it played as compared to just purely looking at its design? Like, what do you think is the right balance there, or is there even a right balance?
There is no right way to vote, right? Like you have your own interpretation of these categories. But like I also as a human with biases, I can't help but kind of look at how things played out and feel like maybe this design could have been done differently, or maybe it's just not that exciting when played, or like some of these thoughts just come to your head.
Yeah.
But
I feel like it's
I feel like a lot of it for me, is the experience of it all. I feel like I like looking back on experiences, and if the game design is good, but I don't remember it that fondly, like I think I would lean towards voting something else.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Grunkle?
I do think it is really important to take into account. I feel like a main match can still be of good design even if there is a bad experience associated with it, or something, or a detail that wasn't caught before it was originally ran. I mean, mainly I'm saying this towards Cogs Leva 2, which I would argue in and of itself is a perfectly fine match, rules-wise. However, there were some conditions within the Codebreakers social at the time that made it a less enjoyable experience for some people compared to others. Like, admittedly, Cogs Leva 2 was a very easily throwable game by definition. And I think that shouldn't take too much away from the design that was put into it. From the scoring mechanism to how the winners and losers are calculated, blah, blah, blah. I think it was a very well thought out game that just wasn't prepared for having a group plan to kill someone, right?
For sure. Before we move on to the next category, I do want to give a personal shout out to Poker Puzzlers, which was probably one of the most fun main matches for me to spectate personally while watching AGDQ, primarily because Evie, who we'll talk about a little later, was really invested in the puzzles and really showed up for it. And the combination of puzzling and poker was pretty well done, I thought. So it's definitely a shout there as well.
I would not want to end the segment without having a little bit of time to talk about Poker Puzzlers. It was absolutely a very hit or miss deathmatch. Hit if you were Evie, miss if you were John Alwyn.
Deathmatch.
I really enjoyed Poker Puzzlers. It did get some flack from players and spectators at the time that it was ran, but I have some nostalgia from the days of going on the Puzzloop website and pulling up the codes and finding good puzzles to use. It it felt like it was the aspect of team games like Decryption Duet, where you have people off in a back room doing puzzles to decide how the cards get dealt. But just that's the entire game. Everyone gets to do that, and I feel like the team-based element really helped bring that idea to fruition and allow it to truly exist. I'm also always just a sucker for some poker, I'll be honest. I have a little bit of beans in me.
I also feel like something Poker Puzzlers did pretty well was that I feel like a lot of puzzle main matches usually end up lacking in the interaction category. But I feel like Poker Puzzlers, because of the way you pulled the cards, right? There was an order and you didn't want to mess anybody up and you wanted to make sure you talked with people. That part meant that there was a lot of talking going on, even during what feels like should have been just puzzles and poker. But yeah.
Yeah, despite it being a deck-building, puzzle-based main match, there's still plenty of room for forward planning and social play. I think that's one of the things that made it a truly great main match.
All right. Well, next up is Best Guest Main Match. And we actually only had 2 of these this year. And they were both from Codebreakers. You've both already seen them, heard them. They're Midas's Gambit, which brought back some eliminated players to the fray, including Grunkle Squeaky himself.
Grunkle's a loser.
And
I'm not a loser. I won Midas's Gambit.
And the second game up for nomination and voting is Decryption Duet, which was the final 3 main match of Codebreakers. And we've already talked about this, but you had to bring along a guest partner to help you do some math. So definitely counts in this category. Any thoughts on which of these 2 should be the best guest main match?
Well, I think Grunkle Squeaky won one of them, and I feel like that should be a very important factor weighing on the people's minds when they make this very important decision.
All right, so you're supporting Midas's Gambit for this category.
Oh my god.
You could say that, yeah.
Do you think it used its guest mechanics particularly well, or is it just because you won it?
I on a little bit of a more serious note, I do like Midas's Gambit more than Decryption Duet, just off of the basis that I will tend to favor more original games. I feel like Midas's Gambit had a lot of character to it as a main match with the ways that different glitches were implemented every round. Things like the mechanic where you could only use each digit once in your bids instead of just being able to pick any number between 0 and N was a ridiculously interesting twist that helped dictate a lot of the game while still, being balanced and comprehensible within the short live game time span that we were playing in. Inro also made great music for it. I do have to give her a shout out for that absolutely iconic moment to anyone that was live spectating that.
Wonderful. Do you remember what song was playing?
She made it herself.
What?
Wow.
She made
that is
music
impressive.
for the glitch that would play through, because whenever any glitch was revealed for a main match, Spicy's mic would quote unquote glitch out. And then it would be announced that the main match had been glitched, whatever. And so, obviously, in a main match where every round the rules got glitched, like, by the 4th glitch, everyone was expecting it to just be like, oh, yeah, he's gonna glitch out again, oh, it's gonna be crazy. But then he just drops a beat on us, and it was ridiculous. It was music sampled from Spicy's voice, and it was a fucking banger.
Dang. Wow, that's a lot of dedication and effort right there.
That's production value.
We'll talk about production value later. Don't worry, we'll get there. But there's plenty of it.
I feel like it would be a little amiss not to talk about how well Decryption Duet was done before we move on from this category, though. Because I know we talked a lot about Decryption Duet earlier, and specifically about its theming, but I feel like the game played really fantastically well, and it definitely kept us on the edges of our seat. I think Final Threes traditionally have a reputation for being difficult to make and balance, and this one I felt like was pretty consistent and well done, so it's definitely a shout out.
I would say that I think that Decryption Duet is potentially what you could claim to be the solution to the Final 3 curse. I feel like in today's society, where Final 3 is regarded as very difficult to make a good main match for, without it just being a board game, we have solved that problem by taking the board game and then adding a math puzzle on the back end of it and then slapping it. But,
Yeah, and the guest interaction was pretty well done too.
oh yeah, absolutely fantastic main match.
Yeah. X, any words on this category? Or
No.
No
Yeah.
words, none.
Wait. Quick question, right? Like,
yeah.
were there like do guests like interact with each other at all, like other than doing puzzles?
It wasn't only the guests that were doing the math. I don't remember
Gotcha.
the exact details, since unfortunately that was like one of the episodes
F.
I was not able to spectate live. But I'm pretty
Gotcha.
sure that it wasn't just like, oh, only the guests do the puzzles and only the players actually play coup. It was some combination. I think they may have done a thing where in the first 2 rounds, either they could always choose, or it was set for the first 2 rounds, and afterwards, whichever you felt like was better, you could stick with.
I see.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you could swap at some point, so there's definitely some room for gameplay there.
I think I kind of feel like at Final 3, you're kind of playing for yourself to win at that point, and there's not much wheeling and dealing you can do rather than just optimal moves, maybe. Whereas, like, I feel like, I don't know, there was a lot more room for that kind of thing in Midas's Gambit.
Yeah, for sure.
Would you say that, Grunkle?
I would say that. I feel like
Yeah.
it's also important to note that in Midas's Gambit, the guests were not brought in by players to like necessarily
Yes.
be on the exact same level as individual players. We were very much just old players that were brought back in for the sake of. It was intended to still be
Redemption
the
and
players'
glory.
main match. We were just there to enjoy it.
Yes, I do feel like from a guest standpoint, I would much more enjoy the freedom of playing my own game in a way, rather than being support for someone else because they invited me and I want them to do well, and I'm gonna feel pressured to not let them down. You know, from the perspective of a guest main match, I think I would have to give it to Midas's Gambit.
I mean, honestly, to be fair,
Yeah.
I could then see myself taking away a little bit of praise for Midas's game being the best team main match, because I feel like team is in very heavy air quotes there with how the
also
game
true.
ended up playing out. Oh, and to correct myself, I have pulled up the rules. It was the player and guest would swap positions, but the team in last place could choose not to swap if they wanted to.
Interesting. Well, let's move on to the next category, and we've got some thinking to do here, folks. This is the best depth for min rules main match. Basically, it's the main match with the least amount of rules, least amount of parsing, but still had the best amount of gameplay depth. Subject to interpretation, of course. We got 6 nominations for this category. Going down the list. Top 1, Ticking Time Bomb from Black Garnet, The Genius 2. This was main match 2, and you couldn't let your opponents blow up the bombs as they ticked down to doom. Next nomination is, once again, Midas's Gambit. You've already heard plenty about that one. Third nomination is A Murder of Crows. That's the same one, the team game with the cats and the crows we talked about earlier. Next up is Grid Adaptation, which was also up for nomination for theming. If you don't remember, it's the Cell game, Conway's Game of Life. Social Snake is also here, and the new nomination here to end it off is Exodus Game from Exordium. That was main match 1, the first opening, and this game you try to trade cubes with your fellow players to try to earn points. However, there's a twist. The black cubes, you gotta avoid those because those are what determines EC and not your point count. All right, we got quite the variety here for this category. Any thoughts, guys?
Well, I will speak on the the one that I was actually involved with. So Exodus game, I think it's a very repeatable game, and you can there's definitely I'd kind of compare Exodus game with like the format of Survivor, where it's a pretty basic game that you can kind of add on like neat little things to it to make it like just a bit different, but enough to give you a more fulfilling experience. And that but I like in terms of like the general rules, I feel like there isn't a lot of reading. But in terms of like when you look at all the trade effects, all the optimization, I think that's where it stops becoming like min reading, you know?
Yeah, I'm a little surprised because as someone who authored the rules to this game, I think the base mechanics are super simple.
Yes.
Right? You trade cubes. Pretty easy. You earn points. Black cubes equals bad. However, each trade has an associated line of text that's like, if you trade a blue cube with a red cube, there's a special effect.
Yes.
And so there's actually a separate channel. There's 2 channels for this game. There's one with the main rules, which are super short, and there's another channel which has all the different trade effects. So I don't really know if it quite qualifies. It's a little bit of a gray area.
There are also different effects per round, per cube. So that does make it longer. However, like if you're only looking at base rules, like I would consider this, but like I personally like I do think the other walls of text like kind of factor in for me. So don't think I would be voting for this one. Not that it's a bad game, but
the way that I interpret the category of best depth for min rules is which of these matches has the most depth to it per like minimum characters within the rules channel. And I feel like a main match that does accomplish that very well would have to be grid adaptation. By virtue of it just being a very... The rules were short, however, it definitely required a lot of forward planning to get almost anything done. It put players into 2 different situations that I don't think many main matches before have been able to do. First off, people were placing cells on the same board that would then just emulate Conway's Game of Life, which to most people already is crazy. And then, here's the thing, whenever a new cell is created within the Conway's Game of Life board, it will have a binary value decided by the binary values of the squares that were used to make it. And each player is assigned a different binary number. So it was a lot of, how do we make a pattern on this board that works? And how do we make it so that we're working with people that will give us the numbers that we need in order for us to be able to score the most points? There were so many different factors and a lot of just ultimate freedom to the game of what you could do and the different things that were possible. It was very tempting for me to just ask somebody to help create a glider with me that would move across the board uninterrupted by anyone else. Like that might have been the ultimate solution.
Yeah, I personally also am a big fan of grid adaptation because the rules are strikingly simple, right? If you want to explain grid adaptation to someone who has no idea about it, all you have to say is different players plays different cells, and then Conway's Game of Life happens. And at the end, whoever has the most cells of their binary type, score them the most points, wins, right? That's basically the entire game. Now, I feel like, to play a little bit of devil's advocate, the knock on grid adaptation might be that Conway's Game of Life isn't really intuitive, and it's not such common knowledge that you don't have to explain it to some layperson. So I feel like there is a little bit of extra comprehension there, although I don't know how that really factors into the overall complexity of the game. How do you feel about that?
Oh, sorry.
Or X, yeah.
Let's do a quick test. I've never heard of Conway's Game of Life, so can you explain that to me in as few words as possible?
Let me give this a shot. Let me see how I want to approach this.
Sure.
Let's go.
All right. Set the scene. Imagine just a board of cells, just like an Excel spreadsheet of square cells. All of them are colored black, right? All of these are deactivated cells. These cells are off.
Sure.
What you can do in Conway's Game of Life, it's a cellular automata. If you press the play button, it will take what it sees, and based on specific rules, it will go to the next stage. And it will show you what the next stage looks like, and it will just keep recursively repeating these rules until it either starts repeating itself or reaches stasis and it just stops moving. The rules are as follows. if a square is empty, but it has exactly 3 on-cell neighbors, if there are 3 cells that are on adjacent to it, like horizontally, vertically, or diagonally, it will turn
or
on.
diagonal, sure.
If a square is already on, and it has less than 2 on neighbors, it dies of loneliness. If it has more than 3 on neighbors, it dies due to overpopulation. It takes these 3 rules, and it just constantly repeats this process over and over and over and over and over again.
I see.
Yeah, I mean, Conway's Game of Life itself is probably a great example of a simulation with a minimum amount of rules that has incredible depth, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So maybe it's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy there to use that to try to win this category. But I do think it is pretty simple. I think there was a lot of depth in the main match. And I especially like that you could change your binary number every, I believe, 3 rounds.
Mm-hmm.
Which meant that you were stuck with what you had, but there was just enough to change your fortunes, right? You could, if you made a mistake or there was a miscalculation or someone made a good play, you could try to piggyback off of them, try to switch off from your terrible bit. And that was a very small rule addition, right? It doesn't add much complexity at all, but opens up so much depth for the game. And I think the overall game design is very, very solid.
I think, of course, I do have to do my usual bit of shilling out for Social Snake. I think at base, Social Snake is a very simple game. You are all snakes on a board. You want to collect apples. You could submit a sequence of moves for your snakes to do that'll all be carried out at the same time. And if you hit people, that's bad.
Yeah.
It leaves the gameplay explanation very simple to allow for most, if not all, the game, as in the name, Social Stake, to be played out in social with other players. Figuring out what you can and cannot get away with. Figuring out where you're going to arbitrarily decide to divide up territory. Figuring out when you're going to be honest about when you want to divide up that territory and how you're going to do it, right?
Yeah.
Snake move across board. Snake eat apple. Snake do not touch other snake.
Wahoo.
Honestly, Social Snake is also a fantastic game. I think this isn't even really a strike against it, but some of the movement sequencing rules are a little confusing. At least for me, this was my first main match ever. And the complexity in the movement sequences and the way collisions were handled was a little verbose. But I mean, once you get it, you get it. You have it for the rest of your time playing it. So not really a knock against it.
I will admit, it was my first Genius main match as well, so I was just sitting there, like, with my head in my hands at the very start, being like, does this mean what I think it really means? Like, how exactly does this edge case work? I don't want to screw this up already, please, dear God.
Yeah, I agree. Any other thoughts on any of the other games? I know Midas's Gambit has come up a lot.
Midas's Gambit's rules were really short. We've already talked enough about it. It deserves its spot on here. It had... I damn well gave it a lot of depth, I'll say that much. And Ticking Time Bomb, I don't have the fondest memories of. If we want to go back to talking about how much of a game should be decided based on its execution, how Ticking Time Bomb went down within Blackguard does live in infamy in my head to this day.
What happened?
The situation with Ticking Time Bomb is that in Suitman games, they have a proxy system where if you can't make it to an episode, you can have a list of players on standby, and one of them can substitute in for you. A player, I don't remember exactly who it was, I think it may have been Kelly, I'm not sure, didn't show up to the episode, and didn't give any advance warning. So instead of being able to pull from whatever proxy list they may or may not have had...
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you're right, it was Shang, because they had to go back for the battle back. Yeah. Shang did not show up for the episode and didn't give advance warning, so the producers had to source an emergency proxy just from people that were hanging around that would be able to do it that day. And the game played on, and only in the final few rounds, if not the very last round, were people made aware of the fact that if an emergency proxy is sent to the deathmatch, they instantly lose the deathmatch. And Black Garnet was played under the genius rules of the player who wins the deathmatch collects the loser's garnets. So it ended up becoming that technically the best strategy for that game was, well, A, you got garnets for having bombs blow up on you, and B, you also got sent to the deathmatch for having the most bombs blown up on you. So it turned out the optimal strategy technically would have been amass as many explosions as possible to farm garnets, and then send Shang to the deathmatch with you to just collect on more garnets.
That's rough.
That is a big yikes.
It was very rough. I feel like without the proxy situation, it would have showed a better light on the main match, which the rules to which I will still claim were very good. It had a lot of Bowser's Big Blast Mario Party vibes to it, which I really appreciated. It was a fun game to play. It was not a fun game to win.
I see. Yeah, I mean, I'm reading the rules. They're very short, and they're very, very simple, right? It's dealing with a core mechanic of bombs, and that's it, and trying to ignite bombs. And so I feel like it's a good fit for this category. I guess the only issue is how it actually played out. And once again, how much you factor that into your vote is entirely up to you. So make of it what you will. All right, let's go on to the most subjective category of all. Well, all of these are pretty subjective, but this one, it's in the name. It's the most fun main match. We got a few different nominations for this. We got some very familiar faces in Decryption Duet, Magician's Market, Social Snake, Grid Adaptation, Midas's Gambit, and we've got 2 new nominations for most fun main match. We got Get Out of Here from Black Garnet the Genius 2, which was main match 5 in that org. You had to try to obtain keys by completing different puzzles in different rooms, and once you collected all the keys, you could escape and get out of there. The other new nomination is Zombie Game from Codebreakers. This was the first main match, and it's Zombie Game. If you've watched the original Genius show, you know how this works out. There's zombies, they try to infect the humans, but this time, things change in the middle of the main match. There's a glitch, and it glitches into a team game between 3 elemental zombies, where you try to make the players your type of elemental zombie to try to win. Those are your nominees. Any initial thoughts, Grunkle X?
You really want to ask me about what my initial thoughts are? Are you sure about this?
Yeah, I do. I am
Grunkle
curious.
Squeaky.
Whoever nominated Zombie Game from the Genius Codebreakers, my Discord handle is Grunkle Squeaky, #0001. Please contact me. I would like to interview you and figure out what your reasoning was for this.
I mean, I will say, in kind of defense of Zombie Game, I feel like the initial version of Zombie Game was Zombie Game, and it was pretty well done. And of course, the twist itself had issues. I think the idea of elemental zombies and trying to win this weird rock paper scissors fight, is very intriguing. Like, it sounds fun, but obviously, Grunkle, I'm sure you can tell us why you don't think it was very fun for you.
Well, when it comes to Zombie Game, originally, the way it worked, your usual Zombie Game rules, there are 3 zombies. Well, because we had a cast of 14 players at the time. Zombies want to infect all the humans. Humans don't want to get infected. But then, after I think it was just the first round, main match became glitched, and it was revealed that we were actually 3 different teams of zombies working against each other. The team of zombies with the most zombies on it would win, and the team of zombies with the few zombies on it would lose. Okay, that's all fine and good. However, we then realized that if you just have a group of humans that you trust, and you just all decide, hey, let's all go and touch the same person, and then we could just keep touching each other so that we stay on the same team and don't get automatically swapped for not touching anyone, and we could just win. And as somebody who was original zombie that was not selected to be the one that everyone touches, it was a very hopeless scenario to be in. It was a lot of me and Sean just like sitting there being like, okay, well, what do we do about this? While just watching everybody else run around and not die.
Did you feel like some people can just win for free in a way?
It did feel like it was possible for people to just be handed a win.
I see.
It felt like there was not a whole lot of reasonable counterplay, which was frustrating at times.
Yeah, that does sound pretty frustrating.
I lived though, so actually maybe it was a pretty okay main match. 7 out of 10.
All right, I guess I'm going to be doing this field this time. I think Social Snake was very, very fun. And I know I'm a little biased because it's my first Genius main match ever.
I agree.
But the way the game was pretty simple to understand, the way the rounds were well processed, and the way the game encourages you, most importantly, to socialize with others constantly about, hey, where are you going to start? Hey, which way are you going? Hey, can we negotiate this side of the board so we split it up evenly? That always paranoia that someone's going to try to betray you, cut off your snake. It was really fun, and of course the way it played out with Grunkle cutting off Red's Toad with the help of Luridia, sending Reds to the deathmatch, that type of play was able to shine because the rules were so social and so flexible. And it was a lot of fun to play.
I'm realizing I need to start being more supportive of main matches that I didn't win.
You just realized that?
I did kind of only just realize that. Well, specifically the Social Snake, because I never really considered myself as having one Social Snake, but I did kind of get directly given a token by Luridium, so that does help a little bit. I mean, to be fair, I say a lot of good things about grid adaptation. I'm not only main matches that I won.
Yeah, that's true. I think grid adaptation definitely belongs here too. It was a lot of fun. I mean, we already talked about the depth it provided, and we lived that depth to the maximum. We were strategizing and socializing and trying to figure out ways to save people, brainstorming bit changes. It was a lot of fun to play. But X, I know you were a spectator for these experiences, and I kind of want your spectator take on what do you think was the most fun main match?
I kind of feel like it has to be Social Snake. Not gonna lie. I think just as a concept and just seeing how people divide up the board and negotiate, I think it's really fun, interesting, very repeatable game, and there is no fourth thing, but
I mean, it was it fun to spectate as well?
I would say so. I mean, I think you've also experienced spectating Social Snake.
You're welcome.
That is true, but I didn't really pay attention too much in Andy's Genius and Quick. It was a lot of fun though, watching all the brainstorming and people trying to get out of holes.
Or get further into them, depending on who you are.
Although I would not say I wouldn't put the spectating experience I wouldn't factor that in too much personally.
You think the players' experiences is what
I think
matters a little more?
I think most fun main match refers to most fun to play rather than to spectate. So I am looking more so on on how fun I think the main match would be to play if I haven't played it, which all of these but one I have not.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're giving a lot of praise to Genius Game 4 and some of its designs, and rightfully so, but let's also talk about some of the other designs here, particularly Magician's Market.
I do want to talk about Magician's Market.
Incredibly fun to play. Yeah.
I was a very, very big fan of Magician's Market, mainly after I was able to properly program Google Sheets to do all the updates that there was no way in hell I was going to do manually. But Magician's Market, admittedly, was not a very simple game. It would be foolish of me to try to claim that. But I feel like the way that Magician's Market ended up working with ways to have influence over different magicians, to be able to manipulate the prices of different items in the economy, and to just be able... there was also just a whole auctioning phase. It was a very... despite the complexity, and despite the density of the rules, it has fairly short rules, if you ignore the walls of clarifications and addendums. But it felt like a very... at least while I was spectating, and in the small amount of playtesting that I did partake in, it felt like a very intuitive system. It has a lot of ways to make sure and explain the system all the way through, but it had a very basic supply and demand correlation. The items of which there were less of would be sold for higher prices. It was I just think it was probably one of my favorite main matches of all time. I think Magician's Market is absolutely wonderful.
That is high praise, but honestly, probably deserves it.
Especially when we get to talking about Myth later, it will give Magician's Market a little bit more time in the sun. But
yeah, I mean, we'll talk about it more, but we also have 2 other Code Breakers games up. We have Midas's Gambit and Decryption Duet, and you probably heard a lot about these 2 games already, but Grunkle, they were fun.
They were fun.
Yeah, they were fun to watch. I'm sure Midas's Gambit was fun to play as well with all those glitches, right? Like, that adds to kind of the tension, don't you think?
It did so well at utilizing the live format and just taking advantage of every single thing it could. It was one single match that felt like it was 5 different matches, and I would absolutely just play it again for fun if I could.
That is exactly what this category is probably looking for. So, all right, well, I don't think we can move on without discussing the last nominee here, which is Get Out of Here. And thankfully, we actually have a player. XNimus actually played this main match as a substitute.
I sucked at this game. I sucked.
XNimus, it's okay. I promise you will not be the person here remembered the most for being bad at main matches.
Thank you, Grunkle Squeaky. This is why we're friends. It's just so I can have a shitty player shield, you know?
Yeah. It's rock, paper, scissors.
No, God. Alright, Get Out of Here, you go. It's a puzzle gauntlet, essentially, right? And I kind of feel like if you're bad at puzzles, I don't think you have many other options, like, in terms of, like, how to play the main match. Like,
yeah, I mean,
there's even a key
you just
trading...
have to solve puzzles.
There's even a key trading system, but the trades had to be 1-to-1, so you had to win a puzzle in order to make deals and trades to begin with. So, as someone who is terrible at, like, everything, I've only solved 1 puzzle, and that was in a room with 2 people, including myself. I'm more of a social kind of player, I'd say. I like making deals and stuff like that. So, like, this was definitely out of my element of expertise, but I do think there are puzzle enthusiasts that would enjoy a game like this, where they'd have one main match to de-stress from, like, all the social dealings and stuff.
Right. How was the puzzle quality? Like,
I think some of the puzzles were pretty simple, and some of them people struggled with. I do think some rooms were easier than others. There was one specific... I've only admittedly done 3 of the 4 rooms, because I attempted the same room twice. Which, that one was the hardest one. That was a big mistake on my end. No, one of the puzzles was a rebus puzzle, where you're given an image. It's sort of like wordplay based on the image. Like, the one I got was... You got a jack card, and then, like, 3 arrows pointing down to, like, illustrations of different working people or whatever, different jobs, I guess, and like the answer would be jack of all trades, right? Also keys were limited to the first person to get it, and so that something like that was, like, incredibly, like, obvious that, like, there were multiple people. That puzzle became a typing race, essentially. but like I don't really have a problem with it in that like it's a puzzle, it's solvable, you know, whatever, right? Uh, there was one puzzle for the board puzzle room, because one of the puzzle types was like sort of a grid puzzles, like think like your nanograms and Sudoku, you know, things like that, right? And one of them was just straight up a maze, and it was giant, and no one solved that.
I see.
No, and that was my only qualms with it. One of the puzzles just felt like it would be too time consuming, like lots of brute forcing. There's one other puzzle type that I did not do, and that's like research. And like basically like one of the examples they gave was like who something silly like what who is this who is this tweet from? The hint, it's the 73rd evicted Big Brother player in US Big Brother. Something silly like that, right? As soon as I saw the example, I just went no chance in hell, buddy, no, goodbye. I ain't doing that. So yeah, some of the puzzles were fine, some of them were not to my liking. I think that's the better way to word it. But I think that's just how it is with puzzle games in general. Like sometimes you get hard ones, sometimes you'll get easy ones. I don't think that's a knock on the main match mechanics themselves, right? Like I think things like that can just, like if you were ever to rerun the main match, like you can easily just get better puzzles, right? Not necessarily easily, but you can just get better puzzles. Whereas like you don't need to rework the main match in that sense.
Yeah. Is the main match itself solid?
Solid if you don't like social. I liked social. So that was not for me. Sorry, Jack. Alright, anyway.
Alright, well that's it for our main match categories. Let's go on to DMs, and we're going to do basically the same gauntlet here. First start with best deathmatch to make use of its theme and its mechanics. We got a new set of nominees here. You got Santorini from DM Coliseum 2, which is a game where you parade as Greek gods and goddesses and try to trap your opponent. We have 3-lane pushback from Black Garnet the Genius 2, a game where you try to goal in your 3 pieces before your opponent can. Multi-Planetary Empire from Genius Game 4, an attempt at a real-time strategy game where you try to claim and win a planetary empire. We also have Roundabout from Andy's Genius Done Quick, where you try to navigate a roundabout and try to get to where you need to. And finally, we have Flower Field from Genius Game 4, where you try to place flowers on a grid and make sure you don't place them in such a way that there are repeating patterns that your opponent can challenge. Those are your 5 nominees. All right, Grunkle. Any thoughts?
I'm going to start this off with something that I feel like very few people would expect to come out of my mouth at any point in time. I don't think that Flowerfield should win this category. I don't think it should be nominated.
Wow.
Listen, I love Flowerfield. We need to come back to Grunkle World for a little bit. Big fan of Flowerfield. But it just doesn't relate theme to mechanics at all, other than just it calls the Tetrominoes flower patches, which is cute and awa, but it just doesn't it doesn't really fit the criteria for this award, I don't think.
I agree. I feel like you can easily easily just say place a red square, place a blue square, place a purple square.
Like, it could
on
be
the board.
gems, it could be baked goods,
Yeah,
it could be whatever you want to be, and it'd still work the same. It wouldn't be the flower field we know and love, but it would be effectively the same thing.
Yes.
To say good things, however, actually no, I can't say good things about Roundabout. That's definitely narcissistic.
I think you
can say good things about it, bro.
You are the person most qualified to speak about it, I feel.
I guess that is fair, yeah. Before I do that...
Because you designed it, right?
Yeah. I would at least like to say, this also might be slightly controversial, I liked Multiplanetary Empire.
Hmm.
I think that admittedly, it is impossible for anybody to say that it wasn't scuffed a little tiny bit in execution. But I feel like Multiplanetary Empire was a very unique idea and a very plausible one that, if anything, is something that I would hope to see improved upon or, what's the word I'm looking for? Remixed, even, in the future. Because it's always been a weird thing, especially over text, where the only kind of like simultaneous submission things that happen are, things where two people submit things privately, or where it's two people having a buzzer race. That's usually like the only kind of direct same time interaction that happens between players in a deathmatch. And I feel like Multiplanetary Empire succeeded in subverting that expectation of buzzer races or whatever the other thing I said was. I very much enjoy the concept of Multiplanetary Empire. Being an RTS deathmatch, it was very wacky and something that I do want to see again. I believe that it can work. I believe that it will work. This is why I voted for Multiplanetary Empire.
Okay, counter argument, right? Are you voting for Multiplanetary or blah blah blah? What is this name? Multiplanetary Empire, or are you voting for RTS game?
Well, okay. I got a little bit too hooked on the RTS part of it, but I feel like the theming of Multiplanetary Empire being, someone in the name, with the travel and currency and construction systems it used, I feel like that it was able to tie in very well theming to mechanics.
That's fair.
I mean, if Grunkle doesn't want to talk about it, I think Roundabout used its theme perfectly for its mechanics, right? You think of a roundabout, you think of how congested it can get on traffic. There's so many things circling around, and that's what this game is, right? There's tons of cars, so to speak, circling around, and you have to try to escape. You gotta get it the right way by turning the right cogs, taking your opportunity and your time. And I feel like this DM was built on the idea of roundabouts and took it to a strategy DM. And I think that's what the category is looking for, right? I feel like it's the perfect fit.
The theme was roundabout. The mechanics were roundabout. Therefore.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's simple as that. Do you have any thoughts, X?
I did not spectate Roundabout at all. I'm sorry, Grunkle.
It's alright. When it comes to Roundabout, the only regrets that I do have about its design, pardon this terrible joking coming, I feel like it had a few too many moving parts. Not in the sense of pieces on the board, but more with some of the ways that the signs were implemented and some of the ways that the cards could have somewhat unintuitive effects. I was very proud of the board and the graphics I made for it, but it could have been displayed more effectively than it was. There are a lot of improvements I would make to Roundabout if it ever were to be used again, which, to be honest, I hope it does, because I was very happy with the end result. But yeah, it really is because just a lot of AGDQ was very top-down design, like I said before, with things like Magician's Market and with Dragon Young Defenders. It was very much, at least with Andy's design process, I absolutely loved working with Andy on this org, because I was always absolutely terrible at coming up with ideas for stuff, but I was very good at execution, which is why, I have Sean with me for Squeaky Genius. Andy is very good at ideas. Andy is very good at having a vision and wanting to capitalize it, and that was something I was able to do. So when Andy came to me and was like, I have to be gone to do stuff, I need you to make this deathmatch, here's a roundabout, and here's what I think about it, have fun. I did have a blast.
Sounds like
Yeah.
the ideal partnership.
I do want to say a few words about Santorini and 3-lane pushback. I feel like Santorini sometimes uses its theming of building, but it's a pretty tenuous connection, right? The Greek god theming is really cute, but there's nothing about the game that is specifically very Greek, or mythos based, other than the gods, right? And some of the gods don't really naturally connect to their mythos origins, so I don't really know if it's the right DM for here, But we'll definitely be talking about it in the future, so look forward to that. And similar thing to 3-lane pushback, which doesn't really have a theme in the sense that theme is traditionally used, but it's a good deathmatch. It's going to show up again in these nominations, and we'll probably talk about it then. All right, next category is the best strategy DM, and these are all the death matches that have some strategical element. Got to plan your moves. You got to make the right move. We got Roundabout once again. We have Santorini once again. We have Flowerfield once again. But they are joined by 5 new shiny death matches. First up is Arsonist's Dilemma from Andy's Genius Done Quick, where you try to draft a house and then you set fire to your opponent's house in such a way that you end up winning points and winning the match. You have Gravity Connect from Exordium, which is a game where you can place pieces and then you can let gravity influence them and you try to make them in a row. We have Catch Up from DM Coliseum 2, very simple abstract game on a hexagonal a very simple abstract game on a hexagonal on a hexagonal
All of this is
field.
ending up in the final cut, by the way.
Yes, Marcer, you're contractually obligated.
No, I'm the
keep
one
this
who's
in.
editing it, so Catch Up from DM Coliseum 2, which is an abstract strategy game that takes place on a hexagonal field where you try to create the largest group possible. But if you make things too big too early, your opponent gets an extra move so that they can catch up. We have Middle Marathon from Genius Game 4, a game loosely based on Middle Race, where you try to race your pieces to the end and make sure that your pieces end up making it in the middle. And finally, Square Goosefeel from DM Coliseum 2, a strategy psych game where you try to win tiles on a weird Goosefeel board and you try to create rows and combos in such a way that you earn the most points. Those are your 8 nominees. Any thoughts on Best Strategy DM?
No thoughts. Head empty. Just like my mindset playing a strategy DM. I think Catch Up is a game I just cannot understand how it's played. Like I know the rules, but it's not intuitive for me, and I feel it is something that you have sort of wired to your brain as something that you can actually play. I don't know how to play this game, but abstract. It's abstract strategy. It looks very balanced. At the end of the day, it's like a see moves ahead kind of game, and I think it's a very solid deathmatch. Flowerfield, I kind of feel it's more observation than strategy. It becomes a game of Nim towards the end, but I think your observational skills are kind of your bread and butter when you play that game. At Square Goosefeel, I'm a very big fan of, but I also feel like it's more primarily psych than strategy. You are free to disagree with me on this one, but I think Flowerfield and Square Goosefeel I automatically just cross off the list just for the sake of I think it is less strategy than the other category.
Now, Flowerfield is a very interesting game to me. I don't know if it's just because I'm accidentally just the obs god of the new millennia or something like that, but I always definitely perceived it to be more of a strategy game than an observation game. Because to me, the observation is kind of just saying that solitaire is a game of observation because you need to see that there's an 8 on the board and there's a 7 in your hand, right? When it comes to Flowerfield, so much of the game, to me at least, is about figuring out how you can maximize the moves that you can make that are beneficial for you and minimize just the amount of moves that your opponent can make in general. Being able to force things and the way you can... I guess a lot of it does come down to observation, because in order to figure out what is a good move or what isn't, it does take a lot of, looking over the board and being able to quickly identify like patterns, being able to quickly identify when squares are unable to be used because any of the 3 colors you could put down would result in a duplicate flower patch. Well, I guess I will probably just concede the flower field is not mainly a strategy DM argument. We'll talk about it later.
I feel like both players would have to like be very very skilled at the game in order to play it like a strat game.
Yeah.
And I feel like most of the time that's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Like most of the time you're not going to be, both players are not going to be at that level.
At like quote unquote high levels of flower field play, it is a 100% strat game.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah,
So I have a... Go ahead, Grunkle.
I had nothing to contribute, but I still felt like speaking for some reason.
We love you too, Grunkle.
Go ahead, Marcy.
So I have a few shouts of my own. Middle Marathon is obviously has a special place in my heart, right? Because it's my first deathmatch, and I think it is an incredibly solid strategy DM. I don't think it has amazing depth, but it is a strategy DM through and through, and it executes very well, right? You have so many choices, you have so many options, and so many different things to consider, right? Because there's 10 pieces on the board, 10? No, there's 9 pieces on the board. And, each piece you have interacts differently. It has unique effects. And your opponent has the same copy. And then there's a neutral piece that you can mess around with. And then you have 5 different movement cards that you have to use, all of them before they refresh. There's so much here, so many decisions you can make, right? What movement card do I use on what piece and when? How does that affect my future turns? That it is a strategy game through and through. And I feel like it was really good and it was really fun. Now, I'm going to concede that, the game takes a while to finish because it is a marathon. And it's probably not as deep as some of the other games here. The replay value may be a little shorter. But I had a lot of fun playing it, and I think it's definitely deserves to be nominated and even voted for. The other shout out I have in mind is Santorini from DM Coliseum 2, which is a fantastic game. I said, its themes don't really connect to its mechanics, but the mechanics it has are just fascinating, right? You're moving your pieces, your workers around the board, and putting down these pillars, right? And you climb up pillars, and the goal of the game is ultimately to get to the 3rd floor of pillaring by building your own pillars and climbing up the stairs you make, or by trapping your opponent, making them not able to move. And that's such a fascinating concept where there's so much counting, there's so much foresight, and you have this board you can move around in, and you don't know where you want to move and where you want to place. It is such a deep game that also has amazing replay value because of the different god abilities, right? Each time you play, you can choose a different god ability, you can choose a different pair of god abilities. The replay value is out of the roof, and I think it is my personal choice for best strategy DM.
The only reservation I would have about voting for Santorini from DMC2 is that it's effectively just the board game that already exists, that at least I was very familiar with already going into it. For things like
right.
what the Codebreakers main match, Final 3, like Decryption Duet, there you go. I was very much more on board with because as a deathmatch or as a main match, it included the extra element of the whole partner mechanic and partner system. And for me, originality is something that I think is it's an important characteristic to me whenever I'm voting for main matches or death matches or orgs in general. It is something I appreciate. I will admit that Santorini is a great game. It's an amazing game, one that I love having in my collection. But I would just want to potentially try if, there's another main match that's deserving of it. Like, I would even argue, Middle Marathon, which I did vote for, to be deserving of the title. I'd like to give the other ones a shot if possible.
I'd agree with that take. Just on principle, I feel kind of bad not voting for a game that already exists that a professional board game designer kind of created.
I guess this means that the same argument would apply to catch up too, right? By it
Yeah,
already
yeah,
being like an established abstract game.
yeah.
Yeah.
I also would like to give a quick shout on my own to Arsenal's Dilemma from AGDQ. Like, while of course, Arsenal's Dilemma has had its moments with burning beacon banana go it had its plenty of charm in its theming. That there is just so much about Arsenal's Dilemma that I look at it and it makes me feel like it's like the candy of org design. Seeing things like each player can assign a price to any of these 9 structures, and the price could be any positive integer. Like, you read that, and at least to me, I'm just instantly hooked on how this could ever possibly work, right? There are a lot of things about Arceus Dilemma that you look at. You look at all the different structures, you look at how the house building and, burning down phases actually work. And it's this very weird, just way in which all of these very different pieces can manage to come together to function properly as one cohesive deathmatch. And it feels almost magical to me. And I really appreciate it for what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I remember reading the line you specifically mentioned, right? The line about you can price it any way you want. And that's a pretty crazy line of text to include in the rules, because you can go so high. You can put it at million, billion, but it works within the context of the game, and it works very well. I think Gravity Connect deserves a shout out, though. Don't you think, X?
It's a simple game. It's pretty fun.
Do you think it belongs here, though?
I do kind of feel bad that a game that was made in an hour kind of got nominated. But
nobody needs to know that. I mean,
welcome to the Bashing on Exordium podcast. I'm your host, Grunkle
Squeaky. But I mean,
it was well done. Like,
I do think for what it is, it's really fun. It's very simple to understand, I'd say. I hope, and I think it's a very repeatable game.
For sure. I mean, I think it's a fun time. Like, I think ultimately you said that it was made in 1 hour, but the quality of the game is pretty damn good, and it's something I would probably play. It's very intuitive. The rules are very simple.
I thought you were
fun.
cutting that because you said some things don't need to be said, but then you referenced the 1 hour thing. Oh God, I'm gonna live with this comment.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I feel like there were a lot of good strategy DMs this year. This is going to be a tough category.
I agree.
All right, well, let's go to a different type of category, best psychological deathmatch. Now, these are the games that require you to read your opponent, predict what they're doing. We got a few here, though. We got Arsonist's Dilemma coming back. We got Square Goosefeel returning. But now we have a brand new set of DMs to talk about. We first have Color Dominoes from Exordium, which is a game where you have to place down dominoes which were half made by you and half made by your opponent to try to make big sets and earn points. You have Exploding Tic-Tac-Toe from Kill Sam, which is a very simple looking game of tic-tac-toe with some big numbers that you can earn points on. But there's a catch. One of the spots will explode and make you instantly lose the round if you try to place on it. We have Little Hunters from DM Coliseum 2, which is a nice little game where you try to play numbers between 1 through 5. If you play a lower number, you get to try to guess your opponent's number. If you're right, you win the entire bout. If you're wrong, you're down a point. Keep doing this, see who wins. And the game is so simple that you play it 15 times, and it's a best out of 15. We have Black and White Double-Sided Poker, which is from Black Garnet the Genius 2, which is basically double-sided poker, except black and white cards are chosen early on. We have Magician's Duel, which is from Andy's Genius Done Quick DM1. And in this game, you have magicians fighting it out with different spells and abilities across a grid battlefield and try to survive while hurting your enemy. And we finally have Hornswoggle from the Genius Codebreakers, which is based on the very popular game Skull, but at this time it's with partners. All right, any takers?
Square Goosefeel!
Square Goosefeel?
I'm a big fan of Square Goosefeel.
I will admit I am also a Square Goosefeel enjoyer. I can get on this train.
I feel like
Yeah, I'm curious. What do you guys like about it?
so Little Hunters is a very simple game, where you pick the higher number, or not necessarily the higher number, but like it in some ways you are ultimately like if in Little Hunters if the game keeps going on, if the game doesn't end in 3 rounds, whoever played the highest overall numbers win, right? And in Square Goosefeel, you are rewarded for playing the higher number, but like you do it like it's in some way it's not just play the higher number, it's also like play the higher number on a tile where it will matter. Like you don't have to win many times, you have to win significant tiles. And in that sense, that's where like some of the strategy comes in. And but also like you mainly have to win interactions, but the game is big enough to where you will have many interactions and it will not be too swingy of a game, I feel, within the confines of one bout. Unlike in Little Hunters, I do feel it is a little more swingy. But that is the nature of Psych. But I do feel like for the amount of thinking you have to do, for the amount of factors to consider, and then for how simple the game is, I really enjoy Square Goosefeel.
I am going to continue to give some praise to Square Goosefeel here for a little bit. I won't make it too long. I'll make sure we get to talk to the other ones as well. But Square Goosefeel to me is just this very, like, absolutely just like gorgeous back and forth of trying to gauge how both players value any specific square on the board and seeing how much they value their cards of different. I need to find a way to not use the word value so many times. Cards of different strengths. Because in order to be able to even bid on a square in the first place, these cards are a limited resource that you have.
Yes.
And you have fewer cards of higher strengths, and it's almost just like a dance of trying to figure out, I know this space is valuable to my opponent, but are they really going to go high on it, or are they going to expect me to skip out on this one and they'll play low?
Yeah.
It is a game with a lot of different variable win cons. There is, of course, like the Exodia squares that I joked about when I had to play it. There are a couple just high-value squares where if you own all of them, and I think there were only, 5 Exodia squares that you need?
There were 4.
Oh, yeah, it was just 4. It was just, the top quarter squares. Yeah, if you have the 5 and 6 strength squares for the 5 and 6 point rows and columns, then that's just game instantly.
Yup.
But it's just this very... It's this delicate dance about, is my opponent going to have the same value assessment of this square that I think they do, and how are they going to act on that? It's multiple levels of Psych that I think are very intuitive and easy for anyone to pick up on, and I think it's just a very well-designed game.
Yes. I do feel it has both complexity and depth to it.
And to give credit to other death matches now that we're done with our Square Goosefeel talk, I really want to say good things about Exploding Tic-Tac-Toe, but I don't want to be made fun of because it's from Kill Sam. I like Exploding Tic-Tac-Toe a lot. It has a very soft spot in my heart. I'll be honest.
What makes it so?
I think that the thing I like so much about it is just how goofy it is. And the fact that even though it's goofy, it still ends up working, too well. It works more than it should. I'm gonna be perfectly honest. Exploding Tic-Tac-Toe conceptually, you just look at it, and you look at this board with these numbers that some people can claim to be ridiculous. But just by the fact of they exist, it creates its own meta around how, maybe you can actually get these ridiculously large numbers sometimes because it's really funny. It really does just bring it down to, like, this purely psychological game around these numbers, but there's just also a tic-tac-toe board there to give it some kind of structure. And I like it a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like Kill Sam is, we'll get to this later on. I think a lot of people consider it a meme or a meme org, but Exploding Tic-Tac-Toe is an actual game. There are rules, they make sense, and you can play it a lot.
Good replay value on Exploding.
And I feel like I feel like where it originates from shouldn't affect how one perceives its roles. And speaking of that, I feel like Color Dominoes is pretty damn good.
I agree.
I think it's not bad at all.
I do like Color Dominoes. It reminds me of 7 Gem Swap from GG4, but just in a Psych DM format. And I do like it more than I like 7 Gem Swap.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the fun part, the idea of, each choosing one part of the domino, right? Your opponent chooses one and you choose one, and then you have to strategically place it in such a way that you end up on top. There's a lot of room for strategy there. And the way the point scoring system is also really interesting. And I have to credit X for coming up with the point scoring system where you're really trying to benefit off of linear groups of tiles, right? It's not just the biggest group, but the linear nature of those groups is super important. And with that, we can also include the special tiles that let you score off of bends, right? The purple tiles. And that's just such a fantastic little twist that's not adding a lot of complexity, but really adds a lot of depth. Like, I think it's a fun Psych DM where the Psych doesn't overpower everything. Like, I feel like a lot of Psych games tend to do that.
I do want to talk about Magician's Duel a little bit. First off, Magician's Duel, I think it's really cute, and because a lot of the matches in Andy Org have the charm of being very heavily related to the main match they come from. The 6 different items you can use in Magician's Duel were, the 6 different items you were selling in the main match. But to speak to what the actual death match is itself, players, there are 6 different spells that each player could use. 3 of them are mobility spells, which allow you to move around a 2-dimensional grid in specific ways. And 3 of them are damage spells, which allow you to hit cells relative to your position on the board in specific ways. And the mechanic about the game that I like the most, you could use up to 3 spells per turn. You could use the same spell multiple times if you have multiple copies of it. But first, it's the fact that 3 spells at a time from each player are carried out per round. It's not just cast a spell and then pick your next spell, it gets cast, pick your next spell, it gets cast. It's you have to stack 3 of them on top of each other. So it really does allow for a lot of, hyper read potential, as I'd like to call it, where you can predict that your opponent is going to, roll away from an attack, and then you can follow up on it and still try to damage them. And also the fact that after each round, because you can only use spells that you actually have and they're consumed when you use them, at the end of each round, your opponent is given a copy of each spell that you did not use on your own turn. Which not only do you have to be worrying about the psychological battlefield that is actually moving around on the board, but you also have to make sure that you are keeping up on your inventory management, making sure that you have movement spells to use so that you're not just a sitting duck for one round where your opponent can jump around and damage you whenever they feel like it. And it's also important to make sure that maybe if you want to try and be a little cheeky about it, you can try to get your opponent to end up in a situation where they only have movement spells, or they only have damage spells rather, and then just can't move anywhere. It has basically these 2 different games that you're playing, the one on the board and the one in your hand, and I think it is a very interesting deathmatch that has a lot of good replayability, just due to the fact that it's, again, almost purely psychological.
Yeah. Any final comments on other games, or?
Little Hunters is funny.
It is funny.
I don't think it's a really good game. It is very simple, but it's very repeatable also.
I mean, it's so simple that it's super repeatable, and you kind of, it's not easy to get bored of. I know that sounds weird, but like,
No, I agree.
it's kind of like rock, paper, scissors, right? You're just like, yeah, I'll play it.
I mean, I would say it's better than rock paper scissors.
I mean, for sure.
That is a very low bar, but yes.
Next category is Best Observation DM, and we have we have one returning face, and we have 3 new faces here. Returning face, Flowerfield from Genius Game 4. I'm sure we'll talk about that a lot. And we have Faulty GPS, also from Genius Game 4. Pattern Assembly from DM Coliseum 2. And finally, Crow Hunt from Exordium. Now, before I open the floor to you guys, I do want to talk a little bit about Crow Hunt, because I was the one who made this game. And I was a little surprised to see it nominated. Like, obviously, I'm grateful that someone liked it enough to think it deserves to be up here with some of these other games. But me personally, I was a little disappointed in its execution. Now, let me tell you what Crow Hunt is about. It's a pretty simple game where you try to hunt for crows, which is a predetermined pattern that you have to find in the board, right? And it's as simple as that. The catch, though, is that you can rotate blocks of 2x2 within the grid, and sometimes you need to rotate to be able to successfully find the crow. So a lot of rotations to make sure you find the crow. I think this concept is really good, and I think the concept would work really well in real life. But the issue with this on Discord in a Genius online org is that you have to type out every rotation, and you have to type out where the rotation is happening. And it means the submissions and what you have to type to try to get a correct answer is super, super long at times. And that, I think, is a pretty big detriment, just the fact that it is hard to execute. I love it, but obviously I think my vote here goes to Flowerfield.
There we go. The flower field. We knew it was coming. We knew it was going to happen.
Well, Grunkle, I'm sure you can tell us all about what makes Flowerfield such a good observation DM specifically.
Specifically as an observation DM, I think Flower Field really benefits from the fact that it really just becomes it can't just become note-taking at times. There is some opening theory that you can practice for it, but there's only so far you can go before any move becomes novelty in Flower Field terms. Observation-wise, the reason why I think Flower Field is really great is because it causes players to have to constantly be analyzing the entire board to make sure that they have all of their options covered and they know everything that they can't do. The big gimmick of Flower Field, for anybody who hasn't played or seen it before, is that you cannot create a group of 4 colored tiles that rotationally or reflection or that are either rotationally or reflectionally.
No.
That's probably
it's
not.
only. Pretty sure it's only.
Is it not
right?
reflections?
No, it's also a reflection.
Yeah,
is
I'm
it?
pretty sure it was reflections. I'd hope it's reflections. Otherwise, I don't know the rules, even though I've played it multiple times. Yeah. You can't have a group of 4 colored tiles that can be rotated or mirrored to be the same as any other 4 tiles on the board. Which means that as the playing field gets larger and larger and more tiles are being placed down, it is basically the 2 players battling to see who is smarter than the other at realizing, oh hey, actually, I can put something here. Or, alternatively, it's a player putting it down and the other player having to actually be able to find the duplication in the field to be able to properly capitalize on it. Just putting down a duplicate does not mean that you take damage. It does rely on your opponent also being able to find it. So there is even some bluff tactics in putting something down that you know doesn't work, but it's obscure enough to where you think your opponent might not be able to catch it. Which, in an observation DM, is something I think is just really funny.
I feel like one of the great things about Flowerfield is that the task of observation right? The task of correcting wrong observation falls on your opponent and not on the host. Like, I think that's what gives it so much more breadth as an observation DM. Like, you can try to do something that is blatantly wrong, but hide it and make it tricky to find. And the possibility of that being a thing really adds to the observation aspect, I think.
Yeah,
Right?
part of the magic of Flower Field is that, there's never even a guarantee when somebody puts down a tile that it's going to be valid or not. It's making sure that both players are constantly on their toes, and when their opponent places something, it's being able to check and find a duplicate if there is one, but it's also being able to discern that it is a valid move and, being able to move on and make your own move when you realize that it's perfectly fine. It forces you to create this balance of analyzing what your opponent does and planning out for your own next turn that I think just fits really well in game flow.
I do think we should talk about the other two games,
Yeah.
though, because Pattern Assembly, for those not in the know, is a memory game where the board disappears and then you have to find the right patterns within the board you had to memorize. And Faulty GPS is a game, very simple. You try to find a tile that satisfies all the conditions, except you have to make sure it satisfies all the conditions but one.
And the one condition you have to satisfy isn't objectively said, like, oh, and the condition you can't follow is this.
No.
It will list off some conditions, and it will just treat all of them the same. You don't know which one has to not be met. It creates a very interesting logic puzzle, which then also combines really nicely with the colorful grids of boards that are provided to you. Something that I do really appreciate about Faulty GPS that not many other games like it do is it has a very explicitly defined bank of words that it uses in its conditions. It explicitly defines things like in front of, it explicitly defines things like north of, adjacent to. Or, I mean, I think things do a decent enough job of explaining adjacent to, but specifically Faulty GPS is very thorough in its wording, which is something that I appreciate a lot from a deathmatch. And I think in this specific observation deathmatch is something that allowing players to very easily convert these words into these observational conditions, I think gives it a lot of power as a deathmatch. Pattern assembly, I wish I could speak more to, but to me it really is just memory, and there isn't that much else I can comment on.
I think the observation part of pattern assembly is very simple. And I feel like normally I would... the observation part of the pattern assembly on its own is very simple. But I think with the memory, I think it gets a bit trickier doing it for memory. And I'd be like, with something like Square Goose Field or Flower Field, right? I would say it's more psych or obs than strat. I feel like the memory portion of pattern assembly, although it is probably the most important, like really complements the observation part for pattern assembly. So I'm perfectly fine with this being here.
Why do you think it complements it so well? Like, what about it?
Because I feel the
works?
memory makes the simple observation mechanic like a bit trickier to do. I feel like if you were to look at a board and with like a bunch of patterns and someone told you, hey, look for this L-shaped pattern with these symbols, like I don't think you're gonna think much of it. But like if you had to do it from memory, I think I do think it is it gets a bit trickier. I feel like I'm reusing the same words.
I mean, yeah, I can definitely see what you're trying to say, right? Like, the game by itself is simple. The memory aspect augments the core game mechanic.
Yes.
In such a way that it becomes an actual game that's fun to play. So it is absolutely necessary. The memory part is necessary for the observation part to function.
Yes, that is how I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are valid thoughts. I think we have 4 pretty decent to amazing candidates here. And it'll be interesting to see who's going to come out on top. But moving on to the best miscellaneous deathmatch of the year. We got a few very, very new faces, but first the returnees. We got Faulty GPS and Multiplanetary Empire coming back for this category. And we got 5 brand new DMs to join them. First, we have WarioWare from Genius Game 4, which, as its name implies, is a collection of different minigames, and whoever wins the most minigames wins the game overall. We have Black Box Decoder, also from Genius Game 4, in which the goal is to construct a function that your opponent has to guess. And then your goal is to guess your opponent's function first by constantly testing inputs and getting outputs and doing the math to figure it out. Then we have Minigame Chess from Exordium, which is a game of chess where you try to advance your pieces and your king forward, but whenever a piece attempts to capture, you play a minigame to see what happens. Then we have Code Triangles from Andy's Genius Done Quick, where you try to spell out letters on these triangles in such a way that you're able to win. And finally, we have Crossy River from the Andy's Genius Done Quick as well, which is basically that game a lot of kids play when they're young, where you try to make things cross a river in such a way that everything crosses it nicely. You know, the sheep and the wolf, you don't want to leave the sheep alone with the wolf, but at a much higher complexity level where you have to figure out the right combination and the right rules on the fly. Those are your nominees. Any initial thoughts? Anything that pops out to you?
First off, it's not mini games, it's micro games for WarioWare. Cool. Alright, go on.
Thanks, XNimus. Where would we be without you?
Still here talking
Nowhere.
about
This podcast wouldn't exist, let's be honest. But yeah, what jumps out to you guys? There's a lot of candidates here.
I do like Crossy River a lot. The main inspiration behind it for Andy was wanting a mystery sign-esque match to be played. And I feel like Crossy River, it accomplishes that almost perfectly. It's just the Wolf Goat Cabbage equivalent of a mystery sign game. It's all of these different interactions that players have to not only experiment to figure out, but then also keep track of themselves and then figure out a way to get all of the different... It's not just restricted to creatures. To get everything to be able to cross the river successfully. It takes a very interesting logic puzzle that is Wolf Goat Cabbage and all of its neighbors, and adds the extra mystery sign element of, oh, but you don't actually know what the rules are. Good luck. And I think it makes for a very fun match.
Not mystery sign. I'll talk about minigame chess because I made that. I think the core concept of playing essentially a chess game, and trying to either capture your opponent's king or get your king to the other side of the board, but like captures being done through the form of minigames, and minigames can range from puzzles to a bout of Little Hunters, or some other observational or even linguistics task, or even math. I think I'm a big fan of the core concept of it. I will say something that was done poorly in execution was the time controls. Whenever like a mini game was played, the people had 1 minute after the buzzer, after they buzz, to submit an answer. And in hindsight, that may have been too much time, too generous. It should have been like 15 seconds, maybe. Maybe it should have just been like, no buzzing, just submit the answer. Whoever submits the answer first, like, gets it. But so that generous time control led to people just buzzing instantly, and locking the other person out of even getting to answer, which made for, admittedly, a more swingy game at times. But I do think, as a concept, it's a really fun game.
On the subject of mini/micro games, yeah, it is time to talk about WarioWare.
Oh,
WarioWare, as a game, is based entirely on the micro games. There is no real, like, quote-unquote game outside of them. It is just the micro games. There is just a cute little 6x6 board for you to traverse along as you pick them, which doesn't really have any impact on anything other than in what order they're played. And players do, I guess, get a little bit of a clue as to what they're getting themselves into by looking at the names of the micro games that they can see. But WarioWare, despite the fact that, in Genius Game 4, it was labeled as miscellaneous, which to everyone just screams, lol, this is gonna be a meme. And it was. I think it was a really enjoyable meme. In execution, of course, it did have its unfortunate moments with sometimes, admittedly, very rarely, I think it was only one time, was a puzzle just objectively wrong with the Shogi Cannons one. And in the gem measuring one, there was a bit of an error with what the correct solution actually was. But outside of that, I feel like the mini games or micro games, I need to make sure that I'm catching myself before X does. I will get screamed at. The micro games that they had for, well, specifically the WarioWare game that was played, were very solid micro games. It is something that needs to be taken into account that, obviously it can't be replayed the exact same way, and it would probably need a new bank of original micro games to flesh it out as a deathmatch concept. But in the execution of it that we did see, I think it had a really good showing. It had a lot of variations in micro games. A lot of them are really fun. Especially the Sudoku one, which haunts me forever.
I do feel, to some extent, I would kind of consider it like a sort of a deathmatch equivalent to Get Out of Here, in that puzzles go burr,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think there's much decision making you can necessarily do, minus a select few micro games. But if it's your thing, I think you can argue the same. Like, some death matches are essentially just be better at this one thing than the other person. So if this is more your thing, I think this is something to look into.
So now you're playing be better at 19 different things than the other person.
You know what? That is an argument. Yes.
Therefore, it's more balanced. There you go.
That is true.
Would you like to speak to Black Box Decoder, Marcy?
Oh, yeah. I was gonna bring it up actually because I think Black Box Decoder is pretty awesome. I gave it a little bit of a summary when we started the category, but right, you're building functions out of a preset of functions, and it's very mathy, right? It's very math heavy, and there's a lot of kind of miscellaneous stuff that happens that makes it a miscellaneous DM, right? It's not just a normal countdown math game. You're sitting there looking at functions and how different functions interact with functions, their inputs and outputs. You can change your number to a string. Like, it's pretty complicated, but I feel like it hits a really nice sweet spot of a mental game, a math game that is completely unique and takes a lot of the agency and gives it to the players, right? You get to build your functions. Your opponent gets to build their functions. You play and try to guess on your opponent's functions. And if you're right, you're right. If you're wrong, you take a penalty. Your opponent can guess and try to get it right. Basically, everything in the game is driven by the players and their mathematical ability, which is in stark contrast to other math challenges that sometimes rely a lot on what the host thinks is a good mathematical challenge and the host's background in math. This one is entirely up to the players, and I think that's something really special. And overall, the DM is, of course, amazing to play. It's a lot of fun. You're sitting there looking at notes being like, is it better to have the B function first or the A function first? Just a joy to play. And I think it's pretty fun to spectate too, because you're sitting there trying to also guess what each player's functions are. So there's a little bit of engagement there. So I have high praise for it. I think it's personally one of the best Misc DMs of the year.
Cool.
All right. Well, the next category is best optimization deathmatch. Optimization is kind of a vague word. I think some people use it pretty similarly to strategy, but it's a game where you have to optimize your moves, right? You have to try to make the best of what you're given and squeeze out your opponent. And we got 3 candidates for this. We have 2 returnees in Arsonist's Dilemma and Flowerfield. And we have Dragon's Rage, which was the follow-up to Dragoneering Defenders, where the dragons come back and you got to take them down and defend your little town. What are your thoughts?
I'm not gonna lie, not lots of. I feel like lots of death matches have maybe some kind of optimization like element to it. To where I feel like optimization is such a minimal like game element. So when I see Optimisation DM as its own category, I am drawing a blank. But I do think as far as like something that is heavily optimization based goes, I feel like Dragon's Rage like really fits that theme in that you have to build your own city in the most optimal way possible. You have to destroy your opponent's city in the most optimal way possible, you know?
And you have to plan all this out by drafting the cards that you get optimally.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't personally know a lot about Dragon's Rage, but could you guys maybe elaborate a little bit more on, the mechanics? Like, how does it exactly work?
Yeah. The way that Dragon's Rage works, it can be divided into its 3 phases, which are, I believe, if I can remember, it's drafting, it's drafting, then town setup, then dragon attacks. In the drafting phase, there is a selection of buildings and dragon strikes that players, as it says in the name, draft and add to their collection of things that they can use. Each player basically has like a 4 square by 4 square plot of land. And each building card will have a specific, shape of buildings on it. It could be like an L piece that's 3 squares big. It could just be a line of 2 pieces. It could just be anything. It's not revealed to players beforehand what they are, so I don't have any very easy reference image on hand, sadly. But there are buildings and dragon attacks that come in these very specific shapes and attack or either buildings in very specific places or attack very specific places. Then there's the town setup phase where you use the building cards that you have and rotate them and try to fit them into your town. And then there's the attack phase where both players get to use their dragon attacks on their opponent's villages in order to attack the specific spaces on the dragon attack cards, which they can, of course, rotate just like you can rotate building cards. So the 2 big portions of the game are drafting the cards, and then after drafting the cards, it's looking at the city cards that you have and the building cards you have and trying to place them in such a way that it optimizes how many of them can survive your opponent's attacks that are, what's what I'm looking for? You know what they're going to be. You know what attacks your opponent has. And so you have to just try to optimize and plan around it to make sure that it's always just a little bit inconvenient for them to be able to do as much damage as possible.
I mean, that sounds like an optimization. I can't speak anymore. Well, yeah, I mean, that sounds like an optimization deathmatch, and it sounds really, really intriguing.
And I'll be honest, I just don't know how Flowerfield's an optimization deathmatch in the first place.
I mean, I think you can argue that, you're optimizing your placements. You're trying to squeeze out and kill tiles for your opponents to place so that they can't place suddenly in the future. Like, that's kind of optimization.
This is true.
Element is optimization in a similar way, right? You're trying to get rid of liberties. The concept of liberties in Flowerfield is just incredibly unique.
Yeah. We have to be careful with this definition, though. We are slowly approaching chess as an optimization deathmatch territory. Do we really want to go there?
Yeah. I don't know how this category works. I think it's one of the vaguest categories on here, but I think Dragon's Rage.
I feel like how I define how I'd separate strat over optimization is maybe like strat is more on looking moves ahead, like a chess or even a flower field. You are looking several moves ahead, whereas optimization, I don't think it necessarily has that element. Or this is a stupid take now that I think about Dragon's Rage and how you kind of play around other people. Cool, fuck it. I don't know. Chess is
Viewer
optimization.
decide.
I think it's hard.
What does optimization mean in your heart? Vote however you believe.
You know what?
We trust you
Yeah.
to make the right judgment.
I don't know. I feel like some death matches I associate more with strat, and some I go that's optimization.
I guess to
Yeah.
me the difference between strat and optimization would probably be numbers, right?
Like, what do you mean? What do you mean numbers?
Like, because I think optimization, or at least to me, it says a lot more about specifically Arsonist's Dilemma, which would be like managing your prices and managing how much euphoria you get when actually burning it down, and how much euphoria you could squeeze out of a house before it collapses and you basically bust. I think that's probably just like the purest definition of optimization you could have, no?
Right, you're optimizing for some reward.
Yeah.
Mostly numbers.
Oh, so now that
Yeah,
we've
I feel like
decided the
people
winner.
just have. I think like people just have different takes on it.
Yeah.
I don't think this is one we can kind of see a clear direction for what counts as optimization.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, each of these games are optimization in their own way.
I can agree with that take. All right, well, here we are. The final deathmatch category, most fun deathmatch. We got a selection of all familiar faces: Arsonist's Dilemma, Crossy River, Flower Field, Hornswoggle, Minigame Chess, Santorini, and 3-lane pushback. With exactly one newcomer. We've never heard of this one. It's Numerical Melody from Genius Game 4, which is a math DM where you try to figure out what the correct or best set of numbers you want to send out.
Grunkle, did you have fun with that? Good answer.
Listen, math deathmatches are not just what I consider to be fun. I'm not a big math deathmatch kind of guy. I can't do Mystery Sign. I can't do this either. If anything, I feel like maybe Numerical Melody would have been the best optimization deathmatch, considering how some of the rounds went. Honestly,
I mean, kind of, but like,
like the one round
Like
that was like
maybe?
constructed the largest binary string that like doesn't have any repeats of size n or greater.
I mean, you have rounds like that, but then you also have rounds that are just figure out which natural number satisfies all these conditions, or what is the first digit is this and the second digit is this greater than the first digit, and
Yeah.
like those are just math problems, right?
True.
That's not really optimization at all.
Yeah, very hit or miss kind of deathmatch. That it's either you like that kind of stuff or you don't. I think.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like for certain people, the appeal of Numerical Melody is that it's a lot of creativity, right?
Mhm.
You can kind of do whatever you want with it, and you can come up with super interesting questions. But to others, that's exactly the issue. There's not enough restrictions, you know. You can just make anything. That can be a problem. I feel like we'll do our due diligence and talk about Flower Field and also probably Santorini. But I do want to talk a little bit about 3-lane pushback, because I mentioned that we were going to talk about it later. And so I do want to give it a little bit of a shine in the spotlight, because I was watching its debut live. And the way the game works is basically each player has 3 pieces on each side of a board. And you have to get your pieces to the other side before your opponent's does. And there's a bunch of tiles on the board that like send you forward and send you backward. You can capture your opponent. If you jump over them, you stun them. The main mechanic that makes it super interesting to me is that each turn, both players submit a card. And they have the similar card mechanic of Middle Marathon, where you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You just submit one card. It refreshes after every 4 turns. So both players submit a card, and then you have to move 2 out of 3 of your pieces that amount of spaces. And this adds a lot of interesting decisions. Like, obviously, you're going to use your card to want to favorably advance one of your better pieces. But, if your opponent is smart, they can play a card where it's actually optimal. You're going to take a little bit of a hit, but you have to move the piece you want it to move with your own card, with your opponent's card, so that you don't take a huge hit with another piece. And it adds an interesting layer of psychology to an already pretty decent strategical deathmatch. And I think I really appreciated that about 3-lane pushback. I think it was a lot of fun. I think it's a very, very solid design.
I clicked on the checkbox. I will trust your judgment and take for no.
I mean, if we're going to be a little critical of it, I'm not entirely sure if some of the mechanics are balanced. Like, the stun is so strong that you can actually stun lock certain pieces. And that seems a little strong, but I think it's fun. I think it definitely qualifies for being fun, which is what the category is about.
I do agree with that take. I think, especially with the way it was introduced, in that it was a final match that has never been played before. No one knows the rules. They're given minimal time to prepare. Like, for what it was and like how it was presented, I think it was a fun experience. I think unoptimized games are the experience of that is different than a game that's been studied to death and fully optimized. And so I'm looking at unoptimized 3-lane pushback as a fun experience when I'm considering my vote.
Yeah, I think the context of a game definitely, you can definitely factor that into your vote. I think that's perfectly valid. And I think in 3-lane pushback's case, obviously the way it played out, it looked very, very fun. But I know I'm delaying Grunkle from talking about his favorite game of all time. So Grunkle, what is your favorite game of all time?
Well, I mean, but Gravity Connect isn't on here.
Are you dissing Gravity Connect? I can't tell.
I mean, yeah, I like Flowerfield. There's no point in me talking about it. I've said it. I like Flowerfield. I've given my praise to Flowerfield. I like Flowerfield.
Do you think it's fun?
Yeah, I think it's great. If there was an ELO rating system for Flowerfield, I'd grind it.
Okay, that's actually very, very impressive. I think I've also given my spiel about Santorini and why it's so fun. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I'll just dedicate my section to this, to being like, I don't know. I feel like most fun deathmatch is probably the one where maybe originality I value a little less, because it's just about fun.
Yeah.
While the others are more about their designs, right? I don't know if that makes any sense at all. But to me, I feel like voting Santorini here is like a little less weird, so to speak.
I get that, for sure.
And it's amazingly fun. I think that's one thing Santorini absolutely nails, especially with how many different ways you can play it. Mm-hmm. Hornswoggle has been on a lot of these nominations, and we really haven't talked about it at all. So, like, what do you guys think about that game?
I mean, I do like Skull. I enjoy me some Skull. I do also really like the twist that Hornswoggle puts on it with, like, the fact that, well, A, each player has more than one skull, and B, the fact that it's a team game. Which, surprisingly, in Skull, isn't something that's ever really been explored at all. And Skull has always been, like, a very much, like, play for yourself kind of game. So, having a teamwork component definitely does add another whole layer to the game, which does not go unappreciated. It is a very good psychological game that has a very fun mechanic with, bluffing in auctions to get people to bid too many so that they end up flipping over your skull. And also being able to call other people out on it by just passing around in a circle until it gets back to them, then they have to flip their own skull over.
Yeah, I feel like this is kind of a weird qualifier, but I think it works for this category. I think Hornswoggle, out of this selection of nominees, I don't know if it's the best designed or most original or most creative or best psychological game, but I feel like it would be the game I would have the most fun playing in real life. Like, just sitting down with tokens and playing it out. Because it's so simple, but you can do so much with it, right? And it also changes depending on who you play it with. So yeah, I can definitely see Hornswoggle as someone's most fun DM. I think that makes perfect sense.